Okay, so one more thing I want to touch on really quick before we get into the meat of the presentation here today, and that has to do with qualifying myself as far as being someone who knows a little bit about addiction and recovery. Now, some of you may have noticed that when we were going through my resume, I blew through it sort of quick, like especially the first 20 years of my career. So I want to take a quick second to tell you a little bit about my earlier years. Because as you can see, I've been around the addiction treatment industry for a long time. But I've actually been around the treatment industry longer than I've actually been a professional in the field. Because I was one of those that started out at a pretty young age. And my first introduction to the treatment field was when my parents stuck me in rehab when I was 17. Now, that didn't take, and it took about 5 more years before I found out that what they were teaching in there was real, and it didn't go away, and my addiction kept getting worse, and I finally checked myself back into treatment when I was 22. And I got sober, and I did what a lot of people do when they get sober and they want to go out and help other people. I went back to school and I became a drug counselor. And I'm from Minnesota, which is sort of the birthplace, or at that time it was sort of the mecca of the drug treatment world. And I was one of those early generation counselors that came out of there. So I got a lot of really good training and experience. My first job was at one of the best adolescent programs in the country at the time. This picture here is actually from there. In fact, the lady here in this picture was a supervisor of mine who was one of the most valuable mentors I've ever had in my career. I learned a lot about being a good counselor from her, things that I still use today. But I also fell into the trap at that time that can happen for a lot of people who get sober and become counselors, and that's the fact that I never worked my own recovery program. I thought I knew more than those people in the recovery programs because I was a counselor, and I talked about recovery all day, every day. And not surprisingly, I eventually relapsed, and I ended up back in treatment again. And it was that experience that opened the door for me of coming to understand the true meaning of personal transformation. What I thought at the time was the worst thing that ever could have happened to me turned out to be the best thing that ever could have happened to me. I sure didn't understand it at the time, but I have since come to understand that these kind of transformational experiences usually don't happen without some kind of dark period that precedes it. And that might be putting it mildly, more like descending into the abyss, the dark night of the soul, because that's where I was. Things were really bad for me. I'd humiliated myself. I created a public scandal when I relapsed. I was disgraced. I hurt a lot of people. And here I was, a relapsed drug counselor in rehab. And I'm here to report that was not fun. But as painful as it was a life-changing experience. I went to treatment out in Arizona, and I was out there wandering around out in the desert, having spiritual experiences, and I was meditating. I actually had a near-death experience on this spiritual quest out in the desert. That's a story for a different time. But that was the beginning of the long, slow, sometimes scary, sometimes painful process of reestablishing my recovery and really figuring out who I was. That was 33 years ago. And today I can say that I've had a long, rewarding career helping people find recovery. And more specifically, this time around, my focus has been on that personal transformation part and helping others have that experience for themselves. I actually wrote an entire rock musical that's based on this theme, and I made it part of my own treatment program where I'd have young people acting out their own stories of addiction and recovery, and we'd use that as a powerful way to portray their own experiences of personal transformation. Now, I don't think it's hard to see that someone going from addiction to recovery might be regarded as going through a transformational experience. They're leaving their old self behind and they're becoming a new person. But I'm going to take it a step further here by suggesting that the family member who's moving from the pain and chaos of living with an unaddressed problem to that peace of mind place that we talked about earlier is in fact going through a transformational experience as well. And it's my experience that for a lot of family members who are just starting out on this journey, the idea of being able to get to that kind of a place is something that sounds pretty attractive to them. And that sort of brings us back to our initial point about what we're trying to accomplish here by learning how to become effective treatment supporters. Because ultimately, the gift that comes with successful treatment is transformation. And that goes for the family as well as for the treatment client. And there's nothing more special to me than to be able to watch that take place. I spent the first 20 years of my career dedicated to helping treatment clients experience that, but then for the past 10 years, I've sort of taken it a step further as I've been focusing on helping family members actually achieve this same type of transformation. And like I said earlier, the paradox here is that you doing what you need to get to that place ends up being the most effective thing you can do to help your loved one get to that place. So when it comes to transformational experience, you can see that the common denominator here for both the client and the family is successful treatment. And my whole goal here is to help you achieve that.